Well, I struck out on that 2001 LL Bean, but at least I didn't waste the opportunity, the trip to Charlotte. I went by Subaru South Boulevard and picked up a new reman Subaru axle for patches. Part number is SOA 966H900R1. So, without further ado, let's get a new axle and patches. Check that out, OE Subaru struts. And from the part number, they've been on here quite a while. I went ahead and got the clip off of the brake line. One thing I detest about the older Subarus is the fact they run this brake line through the strut instead of how it is secured with a little bracket and a 12mm nut on the newer Subarus. When I have to change struts on these, I take a cutoff wheel and I notch here and here, slide the brake line out, notch the new strut, slide it in, put the clip back on. It still retains it just the same, but without having to disconnect the brake line and bleed the brakes to replace the struts, which is really aggravating. What else we got? Shot penetrating oil and everything. Pulled the cotter pin out here. Our boot ruptured on both ends, so we've got a lot of grease slung out, so we're going to kind of clean as we go. It is on our brake line here and on the brakes here, so we're going to clean all that up, re-grease the sliders and everything on the brakes on this side while we got it apart anyway. And that's about it. Time to get into it. Just use a little piece of mechanics wire to support the caliper so it does not hang and put stress on the brake line. tie rod end loose. Yeah, there's a bit of wiggle in the outer and in the inner, like I showed on the initial video the other day. And this boot is really bad. Definitely need to get that replaced sooner than later. And a little bit of rot in these sway bar end links. Booger did not want to come out of there. But it's freed up. You don't really have to take it out. I just like to get it out of the way where I don't have the wire hanging down. There we go. Now to listen to this wheel bearing. I'm sure it's going to be horrible. No play in it, but as you can hear, hopefully on the microphone, sounds like it's running dry. So definitely going to need pull all this off again to do that wheel bearing, which I hate to do. I wish I had a wheel bearing and a hub right now, but I don't. So I'll have to do it at a later date. As you can see, the ball joint, the boot is completely torn and gone. There's no grease in there. That ball joint is dry. That's why I said that. We do have some we do have movement in the ball joint. Hang on, let me brace up this control arm, or try to. You can see that up and down movement and the bumping. That's not the control arm making that noise, that is the ball joint. Yep, definitely needs lower ball joints on both sides just because of how long that boot's been ruptured and the fact they've run dry. So add that to the list. Now what we got to do to get the axle completely out is crawl into the car, punch the roll pin out, and then we can slide the axle out. All right, here's a little trick for when your wheel bearing's pretty much shot. Sounds like this. Here's a little trick to extend the life a little bit by greasing it. What you need is a grease gun with some high temp grease in it and one of these needle fittings that goes on the end of the grease gun. That'll allow you to get in behind the bearing, inject grease into the center, and re-loop the bearings, repack them, quiet that down, and give you a little while longer before the bearing has to be replaced. And this is if the bearing is loud and has no play in it. If the bearing has play in it, it's a dangerous situation. Go ahead and get it replaced. But if it's just noisy and needs grease, this is the way to grease a non-serviceable sealed bearing. All right, try to give you a better look at what I'm doing here. What I did was pop out carefully the outer bearing lip seal. You want to be careful not to injure it so you can reuse it. And here's after, I'm not completely done yet, but this is after 3 or 4 injections and turning it. You can hear it's not perfect, far from it, but it is miles quieter than it was before greasing it. So what I'm going to try to do now is set up the camera and the grease gun and show you exactly what I'm doing. It's kind of hard to do, need several hands for this, but let me see what I can get. All right, so what I'm doing is taking this needle fitting on the grease gun and I am sliding it between the outer race and the inner bearing, put it in as deep as I can get it, then start pumping away on the grease gun until I see a little grease come to the surface, pull out the needle, and turn the wheel bearing assembly both ways to work that grease into the bearings. And as you hear, it's much quieter now. Like I said, far from perfect, but it'll give you a couple weeks, a couple more miles before you have to go ahead and change that. So just a little quick tip there while I'm in here doing this. I also went ahead and cleaned up all of the grease from that exploded axle boot. So we'll be ready to pull the other end of this axle and get this job wrapped up. Hard to believe, but I think these are original struts that left the factory in '95. That paint mark looks like a factory inspection paint mark. I find it extremely hard to believe that in 289,000 miles this car never had a set of struts put on it from new, but I've seen weirder things, so it's kind of wild. All right, just crawled under and knocked the roll pin out, so now our axle is free to be removed. Here's to show you a little bit better about what I was doing underneath it, and I wasn't able to record it. It's an extremely tight area. But essentially, your CV axle slides onto a stub shaft like this. There's a hole through both of them, and you have this roll pin is what connects them. So basically, you take a roll pin punch, which this is a roll pin punch. As you see, it's got that little nipple on the end. That little nipple fits inside the center of the roll pin, like so. And all you do is drive it out. And once you've driven it out, the axle can come out. Once you've got the new axle in and the holes lined up, that's all you do. You put the roll pin punch in the end of the roll pin and hammer it back down until it's flush. And as you see in the end here, that's what retains your axle on the axle stub that comes out of the transmission, out of the front differential. So, can't show you in the car because the catalytic converter's in the way on the passenger side, but that's all there is to it. Beat it in from one end, out the other. Now I compare the new and old axle before installing them. The axle that came out of this car is not an OE Subaru axle, it is an aftermarket. You can tell that because this is silver. Subaru OE axles are a bright green. Also, it's missing this little flange here and the flange here. Subaru provides you with a brand new roll pin with their Remand axles and a new axle nut. With that said, time to install this new axle in the car. All right, roll pins installed. Let's put it back together. new cotter pin in, torque the spec, torque the spec, torque the spec. Everything cleaned up and shined up. Got all that old axle grease out of here. So now we gotta do is put the brakes on and wheel and tire, and we're good to go. Almost forgot the wheel speed sensor. Alrighty. Time to install the new CV axle nut. Torque it, stake it, and we are good to go. And that's it, we're good. CV axle nut is torqued, brakes are torqued, everything's been cleaned, greased our slide pins on the brakes, brake line is back clipped in, ABS speed sensor is in. All we gotta do now is put the wheel and tire on and take it off the jack stands.